And I remember Jay-Z coming up to me. It was at this club Lotus in New York. And I'm sure that he's about to like tell me like, break your records in your own time. When you're playing a party for me, do you mind not doing this blatant souped up promotion of your own things? And he comes up to me, it's like, Mark. And I'm like, what? He goes,
Mark Ronson in the
Welcome
house.
to tonight's event with Grammy, Academy Award, and Golden Globe winning musician, DJ, songwriter, and producer, Mark Ronson.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Not only can it all go away tomorrow, but I actually don't deserve the thing that I used to clutch onto that and ride it like a rocket out the atmosphere because I loved it, because it made me workaholic and work so hard and act like.
2006, of course, Amy Winehouse brings you into work with her. At that time, how did you sort of see your role? Like, how did you even start?
With Amy specifically, I thought it was just so cool. I thought she was so cool and smart. And I just thought, okay, I've never done anything like that, but I definitely would like to try with this person.
When you were asked to produce the Barbie soundtrack, can you kind of walk me through the process?
You know, Riot is 21 years old and his tracks are like the sound of New York drill. He was kind of asking like, what do you hear on it? I was like,
Mark, thank you so much for joining me. I want to start by asking you about. I know you moved to the U.S. as a kid when you were 8 to New York. What did you listen to as sort of a teenager? I mean, were you listening to what most teenagers were listening to in sort of the late 80s? Pop music. Or?
So when I came here. 83, when I came in from England, I was super into, Duran Duran. I remember that was my first favorite band.
Yeah.
And then I was probably listening to, I had Thriller. I remember like, I want to just list off like Fugazi and the Pixies, I had Huey Lewis and the News 4. I remember that was an album I listened to all the time.
It wasn't Fugazi and the Pixies.
No, but all the big pop shit probably. And then I did like weird things like that now I look back and seem like that was quite adult, like Steve Winwood and Don Henley and all this sort of like what could be now defined as almost like American Psycho yuppie pop, but it was actually incredible music because these were incredible songwriters and great production and the best soul and funk and jazz musicians. There's records like Sting, Nothing
Dream
Like
of the Blue Turtles or Nothing Under the Sun. Yeah.
I liked a lot of that. And so then going into teen years and learning guitar and starting to do that, it was very traditional Led Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix. I liked metal. I loved Guns N' Roses. The first time I heard Welcome to the Jungle and Appetite for Destruction, that was the Bible for me for a whole summer. And I just, all of that stuff. And then my only exposure to hip hop was just the very broad strokes like Run DMC, Raising Hell, and the Beastie Boys and stuff. So I guess that was it. And then when I was 13 or 14, I started to get into. I played a bit of guitar, and there were all these kids that could really shred and play metal, and I didn't have those chops. I was a better rhythm player, and I loved the Meters and Average White Band and bands like that. And I remember I would go to these guitar recitals. I had this one guitar teacher who taught like 100 kids, and once a year I'd have this recitals and these kids would come up and play Eruption by Van Halen and all this stuff, and I'd be like, I'm gonna play Cut the Cake by Average White Band. People were just like, what? Like, and I'd play like these little funk licks, probably not great, but that was the music that really spoke to me. So I guess from that was the point, like funk and R&B and soul and those kind of things started to become like a dominant color.
Yeah. It's interesting because the time that we grew up in the United States, like MTV was so, and FM radio as well, but MTV was so influential. Like MTV really kind of told you what to listen to. And and it's interesting because if you think about like some of the artists that we would watch, like you mentioned Steve Winwood or Don Henley, like they would be considered old. Like they were probably in their 30s at the time, maybe early 40s, but like, or Bruce Springsteen, these artists who were just, that's what great music was. It was just on MTV and you would have, Huey Lewis or whoever was on.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think about it all the time. That John Fogerty song they'd always play, "The Old Man Is Down the Road."
Yeah.
Like all these guys were pushing their late 30s and sort of were on TV next to, Michael Jackson or Prince or whatever else was going on. It did feel like an era where maybe it was the boomers holding on to their thing, but it also was just like, if it was good pop music, it could be played. And then I forget, because I'm so young, that Michael and Prince were 24 then, so they were younger than Bieber is by 4 years now. So there's also this weird skew of like how I remember the age of the artist,
Yeah. Did you, when you took up the guitar, was it something that was easy for you to like connect with? Because instruments, like some kids just connect to them, or like they're forced to play them. Was it like, were you disciplined about practicing as a kid?
I was, but never disciplined enough to get over this like hump, which actually I felt too when I became a DJ. I never practiced quite enough to get that like DJ A-track, jazzy jazz level of skills. I was always kind of comfortable if I could just play along with a song that I loved and get my little ideas out. It was enough. And I wish, of course, I was a little more disciplined, because it's nice to have those chops. And but I was in a band with the other guitar player. There were two of us that played guitar, and the other guy could just like shred his ass off and had like the crazy heavy metal, like the Kramer guitar with the big rack, and he was an amazing guitar player. And I remember at our shows when everyone would take a solo, and I basically like he'd do his crazy solo, and I would almost like hope like someone pulled the club's fire alarm before it got to me. Like I was like, what am I going to play? My dink? Like that's not what I do. I'm never going to be able to solo. But yeah, I guess it's just the way that I was supposed to play.
This was like a high school band?
This is a high school band, yeah.
And when you were in high school bands, like, or in that band in particular, did you see yourself as like the guy in front, or did you see yourself as the guy in the back playing guitar, like the sort of quiet?
I think I definitely harbored some immature fantasies for sure of being this frontman, because you're like 15 and I remember my best friend from school, Alex Kane, I think I called him up like one evening, like we were like on the phone. I probably was supposed to be in bed, and I was like, yeah, just talking about like some gig we were gonna play that. I probably like was a little too like voicing of some like rock star dream of maybe our band. An A&R guy came to the gig, who knows? And he said to me, it's funny, man, because I really just never really picture you as someone on stage. I picture you as somebody like more like behind the boards or something. And I was like, screw you, Alex, like you don't understand, like, and hung up the phone. And I was like, he was completely right at age 15 and a half. But yeah, I think I slowly figured out as I started to see other very prodigious musicians around me like be so good. Like my best friends were really gunslingers, and I was like, okay, maybe this is not my calling. And I actually became a DJ because I just thought like, I'm not good enough at this thing, and I really love this thing over here, and I'm going to try this.
When you were a kid, your mom married Mick Jones, and from Foreigner, and so tell me about that. I mean, all of a sudden you had a real like bona fide rock star in your house,
yes,
who was a pretty good guitar player.
Yes.
Did it change the way you saw music or the way you thought about music at all, having him around?
I loved being in the studio with him. Like when he would let me come to the studio or sit in on these sessions, like I just remember like thinking, this place that looks like a wooden spaceship / boat hall with all these faders and all these people doing cool shit and sort of having a slight grasp of what was going on, but not really. Like it was just my absolute happiest place. And when he would come home sometimes and like play the new mix, I would play, sometimes he'd probably just for kicks be like, hey Mark, what do you think of this one? And I'd occasionally be like, I don't know, the one from the last one from the bass you played me was up, and I felt like it just gelled a little more. I mean, of course I didn't say the word gel, I was 11, but occasionally I would like hit it on the nose and he'd be like, wow. but I loved anything to do with being around him, being around music, the studio environment. He had a little Porta studio at home. There was a synclavier in there, which was like a really advanced program sampler thing of the time, this giant keyboard that I sort of taught myself how to use so I could make cover versions of like Terence Trent D'Arby, Wishing Well, and songs that I was obsessed with.
Oh, great song.
Yeah, so he was really, he was kind of a wild man in those days too, and was partying, but like he partied to be in the studio. So he was very warm and really encouraged and was like, yeah, use the studio when I'm not here. So it was very, very influential, and he was very supportive.
Do you remember, like, when you're in high school, do you remember thinking, like, this is what I want to do? I want to play music for a living, or did you not quite think about that in those terms yet? I applied to the colleges that I applied to were all ones that had really good journalism schools, because I thought maybe I was going to write about music, because I wasn't prodigious enough that there was like a clear lane, like this is what you're supposed to do. I was just like, I just know I love this thing so much, and I don't care if I'm writing about it, being around it, as long as I'm just constantly in the orbit of music, it'll be fine. And then I think, I got super into hip hop in the summer of 92. I got turntables the next year. And so I was DJing. I think I was just, I think I was really short-sighted, to be honest. I was just living day to day, but just so happy to be DJing in clubs or doing whatever. I'm sure I had some kind of grand plan or some dreams, but I think the fact that I was just in this thing every day was enough. What got you into hip hop? Like what album or what group?
Yeah, there was the obvious Beastie Boys, Run DMC stuff, and then watching Yo MTV Raps on MTV. There was a Yo MTV Raps compilation that you could buy, and it was like, do you remember those like 99 CDs for a penny? That completely fucked up my credit score for like years, because decades. Like when I went to get my first apartment, that was still haunting my credit. But there was one CD on there that was like Yo MTV Raps Greatest Hits, and it had Ice-T, like New Jack Hustler. It had Too Short, Life is Too Short. It had like a couple, like Eric B. and Rakim, and that was sort of like a starter kit. And then I bought this mixtape on the street in New York that was like the summer of 92, which was an insane summer for music. So it had Tribe Called Quest Scenario, Snoop Dogg and Dre's first record, Deep Cover, to get like Main Source, all these things, just incredible. And I loved every song on there. And that's what made me think, okay, well, actually in my band, we started to bring rappers on stage and try and like do it, incorporate it live. But it just was like, it was a little sloppy, and it wasn't enough. Like I realized that, okay, DJing is how I can just immerse myself in this music.
And what was DJing? Like, it was like literally two turntables and a microphone? Like, what was that what you started to do?
Yeah, I was a huge fan of Stretch Armstrong on Barbie, the show on that they had on on Columbia radio station.
Columbia University station.
Yeah,
right? Stretch and Barbie. Yeah,
sure. And they were sort of the kings of New York hip hop as well. There's an amazing doc about them actually, and they were the first to play Eminem on air and Biggie, and to allow Wu-Tang to come up, like, because mainstream radio wasn't quite playing all that stuff, even mainstream hip-hop radio. So I listened to that show, and it was on at 1 a.m. on a Thursday night, Friday morning. So I would sometimes set my stereo so it would go off while I was sleeping, because I had school the next morning, and then listen to it like all the next day. But I would listen to that, and I would try and recreate the routines that I heard Stretch doing on the radio. And Stretch was an amazing scratching, cutting DJ. So it was obviously like I was doing this very painfully bad rendition of it, but I would try and just like over and over again recreate how he was scratching two records back and forth, doing echo effects by having one record slightly ahead of the other one, and doing the fader back and forth, just whatever the tricks were. So I would just teach myself listening to the radio because I didn't know anyone else who DJed.
So how did you start getting like jobs playing music for parties or what?
Yeah. There was a high school promoter who was like friends with a friend, and I went to this prep school in New York, and there were like these bars that would let underage kids in, and they were kind of sort of cheesy, but they all played, George Michael Faith on repeat,
Yeah.
And obviously I love George Michael, but they were just almost cheesy, like it was like just whatever the pop tunes were.
Yeah.
And this kid, the promoter, was like, had this idea like, okay, well, if I can throw a party for high school kids, but have the music be good. And then there were no DJs really around, and I just convinced him. I said, basically, I'll bring all my equipment and I'll do it for free. So 3 months into DJing, I had this gig that I was probably not really ready to play, but and I just started getting these high school gigs because I was just hungry, and I'd play anywhere, and I'd bring my equipment. And then from there, it just kind of grew. And then going away to Vassar for a year of college was almost my minor league training, like just DJing every night in the college bar, every other night, and DJing on the radio station there, and practicing a ton in my room. And that was, by the time I came back to the city, I was a lot better.
And you basically started, you were in college, and your weekends or even during weeknights were just filled with going to clubs and playing music.
Yeah, at first I did really like being away for college, having spent most of my life in Manhattan, and so I was staying up there and DJing campus parties and whatever it was. But by the second year, I was really starting to I was living on the Metro North train, basically coming back and forth and schlepping like my crates of records and for any gig, because at that point you're not going to turn down anything.
Yeah.
So it got crazy, and that's when I just my grades just tanked, and I was taking a Hebrew language course, and my friend told me that one of the questions on the Hebrew final exam was just in Hebrew was "Where is Mark?" So it was that's about sums up my scholastic experience.
A couple years ago, I interviewed David Guetta, and it was actually one of the most interesting conversations I've really had, because he has a very interesting background. His parents were like diehard communists, and
wow,
he grew up sort of as a rebel because he wanted to make money, and he was a DJ for years, and before it meant something, right?
Yeah.
And he's really like one of the kind of pioneers in sort of turning the tables, and it was the DJ was the producer who became the marquee name, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember sort of talking to him about this period in his life in the 80s and even in the in the 90s, when being a DJ meant just spinning music, just playing music. It didn't, that's what it meant, and people didn't really regard them as people who made music or produced music. When you were going to clubs, DJing, was that, is that how you kind of remember it? Was it just, obviously you're younger than Dave Guetta, but...
No, none of the DJs I went out to see, all the DJs played because they were really good at what they did. It became much later, and sort of in the EDM revolution, of which David Guetta was definitely at the forefront, that people started to go see DJs because they liked the songs that they made. Of course, there were great DJs that I used to see, like Clark Kent was another one of my favorites, who had produced songs for Rakim and Biggie, but that wasn't why you went out to see a DJ at all. And, a lot of the places... I'm writing a book actually right now about New York in the 90s as from a DJ's perspective, from 93 to 99. So it's very, prevalent in my head right now. But, half of the clubs that you'd go to, the turntables would be shoved in a corner, or at the end of the bar, and you would have to crane your neck to even see the dance floor. The people were psyched if you were doing a good job, but nobody really cared who the DJ was. You just had to keep the floor going. So, and I love those days, because when it all changed, when I had my first success as a producer maybe 15 years ago, and I started to have gigs where they plonk you on a stage, and now everybody's staring at you, waiting for you to do something. Like, it's just not. I like playing records anonymously. Like, that is when I'm actually the most happy. Prince belongs on a stage. DJs are not exciting performers. I mean, that's why we obviously have to make up for it with lasers and LEDs and all these things. And some DJ shows are incredible, and some DJs are actually decent performers, but that is not how I got into the game. That is not what I think that our natural habitat is.
Do you remember, I mean, because your job, right, certainly in the 90s, was to make people dance, right?
Yeah.
To get them out and to get them moving. And so presumably that's how you thought of, like that's how you chose music and how you sort of decided what to play and in the order in which to play it and how to kind of mix it. Is that more or less true?
Yeah, there was, in those days, now for a DJ, if you're playing at a festival, you get on and maybe your set is 60 to 90 minutes. Back then you were playing from 10 a.m. to closing, which was 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. So there was this, it's so funny to think about it all now, but there was a real New York recipe to how you built the night in clubs. You would play funk and disco till about 12. Then you might go into some old school hip hop, Slick Rick and things like that till 12:30, 1 a.m. before you played all the hits that everybody wanted to hear. And you would always try and stave off playing the big hits as long as possible, because the longer you could do that, the bigger the explosion, the orgasm, when you suddenly just go into Jay-Z and all the big records. And it was also fun to play a lot of those old records. And then you might play that till 2:30. Then you play a bit of reggae, a bit of house, and then maybe some slow jams, and the night's over. So you would build your night, and there was it was a language to it. It was I'd probably over romanticizing it, but yeah, it was a mixture of, you played the records that you loved, you played things that you thought would build the crowd in the night in the right way, and then there was this sort of unspoken New York format.
So how did you start to kind of make this transition from DJ to producer to actually making music or producing music for other people?
Yeah. I always made music at the same time. I had a little studio. Anybody who I met in the club or through DJing out who happened to be an R&B singer or rapper, I'd say, come to my studio, here's my number, call me, like, come over, we could make a demo. We were just messing around because it was fun. And then because I was DJing in these clubs that everybody liked to come hang out, and from all the way on from Puffy to, say an A&R guy at Tommy Boy, I was playing the cool downtown hip hop clubs. So, occasionally someone would be like, oh, you want to do this, do you produce? You want to do a De La Soul remix? And so I had like little things here and there.
Yeah.
And then my first real gig was with this amazing singer named Nika Costa, who was signed to Virgin through D'Angelo's label. And her manager and D'Angelo's manager, this amazing guy is no longer with us, named Dominic Trenier, was this brilliant sort of impresario, label head, had amazing taste. His nickname was Exotic Dom, which I think Puffy or Andre Harrell had given it because he was a young black kid from New Orleans, but like always had the coolest like European. He was just a little avant-garde, his taste in left field, and he would come to the clubs that I DJ'd at. And I remember him saying, because at this point in my sets, I was playing hip hop, but then I would occasionally throw in an AC/DC record or Rufus and Shaka Khan. I was just trying to break it up a little bit. And he said, I've signed this singer, Nika Costa, and I don't know anything about what her music should sound like, but I know what it should feel like. And it's one of your DJ sets. It's Biggie, it's Shaka, it's, AC/DC. So he took a big chance on me, and so did Nika. And I started working on her record, and it was a different era of the music industry where a label would let you develop something for a year and a half and, let you find the sound. There wasn't this insane pressure to like deliver a viral hit right away. Yeah. And the song from that that became the lead-off single is the song Like a Feather, and it was in a Hilfiger commercial, and I remember playing it out, and I remember Jay-Z coming up to me at a club when I was DJing. I think I was DJing an album release party for actually one of his albums, and I threw that song that I produced in the prime time of the night, and he starts to come over to the booth. It was at this club Lotus in New York, and I'm sure that he's about to like tell me like, dude, like, when you break your records in your own time, when you're playing a party for me, do you mind not doing this sort of blatant souped up promotion of your own things? And he comes up to me, it's like, Mark, and I'm like, what? He goes, yo, tell me when you do a remix of this, promise me you'll let me be the cat that rhymes on it. And I just couldn't believe it. Needless to say, many phone calls to his office went unreturned, but it was cool that DJ Premier, who was my hero from Gangstar, came up to me one time I was playing it. So suddenly I had a record that I had made that was making these ripples and waves, but that was still 8 years after I started producing, or maybe 6 years. And so that was kind of my first record. I mean, it wasn't a huge commercial success, but it put me on the map.
You signed with Elektra at that time, when you worked with Nika Costa, and eventually released your own record, Here Comes the Fuzz, which I was listening to just in the last couple of days. So it's a really good record. It came out in 2003. And I'm curious at that time, because I don't entirely remember, but was that unusual because you obviously played the guitar, you composed the music, keyboards, bass, but your voice isn't on it, right? You're not singing in the songs. Was it unusual for that kind of record to come out, like the sort of the creator of the record, but featuring all these people?
I think there were two things that were happening. There was all the big hip hop DJs, all the guys on Hot 97, DJ Clue, Funkmaster Flex, Kid Capri, all the legendary hip hop guys were making these DJ compilation records. And so and some of them were having really big success. And then there was Fatboy Slim and this stuff out of the UK and Shadow. But mine was like, it wasn't hip hop enough to be hip hop. It wasn't breakbeat and UK and instrumental enough to be that thing either. So it kind of just sat in the middle and no one really knew what to do with it. So yeah, I think because it was unusual to have a pop record. Before David Guetta and Calvin Harris came along, it was unusual to have a pop record where it said the DJ's name first. That just didn't really make sense to people. But luckily, the song Ooh Wee with Ghostface and Nate Dogg was this kind of like a nominal hit in the UK, and enough to make a splash there that eventually led to me meeting Amy Winehouse and Lily Allen a couple years later, because I had this slight awareness around my name as a producer in the UK because of that. But no, I always not joke, but I've said it to Calvin Harris, who I've known for a long time. Before him and Guetta had those huge successes, it was almost unheard of for America to really look at a producer's name before the artist. And I even remember when Valerie, the song I had with Amy Winehouse, it was about to come out, and it had already been quite a big hit in the UK and elsewhere. And somebody at the label in America said, nah, it's never going to work. No one in America will ever understand the thing about the DJ's name before the artist's name. And Valerie didn't even chart on the top 100 in America. I mean, obviously it's come to become a signature song of hers. And it's an odd thing, really, because like, why is my name ahead of hers? Like, it's an Amy Winehouse song. She's singing. Everything about it is the same job description that I did on Back to Black. All I did was do the arrangement, get the musicians in, produce her vocal. So why is this one on her album? Why is Uptown Funk not just a song from Bruno Mars's record? And a lot of that stuff is just honestly like the luck of timing. I was working on my record. I came to Amy and said, hey, do you want to do a song for my record with Bruno? Yeah. We'd come off of working on his album and just were jamming with the intention of coming up for something for my record. So I'm very lucky that these immensely talented individuals have just decided to be like, yeah, let's do one for your record, because it is really no different than something I would produce on theirs.
I'm curious about that first record you released because it did get pretty good reviews, but I think just a couple of weeks after it was released, Elektra dropped you from the label.
Yeah, a week.
A week.
A week. I remember having to pay Ghostface first class airfare from New York to come and do the Craig Kilborn show. So yes, it was over before it began.
And did you feel like that was a setback, or did you think this is no big deal? I'm going to move forward. I mean, I don't know. I mean, Elektra's a pretty big label. Did you feel like this is not a vote of confidence? Maybe I'm in trouble.
It was really strange, but maybe it's because I just have such low expectations for anything that it just seemed like par for the course in some ways. I certainly never imagined it being a roaring success, and I'm sure that comes with like insecurities and whatever, and maybe just the fact that I was just had the blinders on and was just going one day at a time. But yeah, it was. I did think that. Yeah, I guess it just didn't work out. And I could still go to England and play like little clubs for 300-400 people and play for these receptive crowds for like the next year or two. So that was all I needed. I could still go DJ. I could pay my rent. I wasn't, curled up in the fetal position crying myself to sleep at night, but I had to start doing, again, music for a Gap commercial or a Hyundai commercial in Japan because some video director would throw me a bone occasionally. And that was also sort of fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious about how you started to, like 2006, of course, this is a well-known story. You're brought in, Amy Winehouse brings you in to work with her. But I'm curious to get a sense of how you began to think about your role, like, producer like Nile Rodgers or Brian Eno or even Dr. Dre, like they all do different things and bring different things to the artists they work with. Like sometimes they're playing instruments, sometimes they're singing backing vocals. Obviously, technology has changed the role of producers in huge ways and has enabled them to do even more things. At that time, how did you sort of see your role? Did you see yourself as somebody who'd be brought in to like shape existing music or create music or channel what an artist was trying to do? Like, how did you even? Let's just talk about Amy Winehouse, for example. Like, how did you even start?
It's so different with each artist, and usually if there's somebody that comes in a room and plays me some demos and you're excited, that is the thing that just tells you everything that you're about to do. My friend Richard Russell, who wrote a great book, Everything is Recorded, who started XL Recordings, he said something that, obviously it's very, very loose job description. He said, producer is a good producer is just a series of making the right decisions. It's almost like every artist presents a choose your own adventure that is going to change which way you go. But with Amy specifically, she came in and she said, I'm working on this album. And I said just the most obvious thing that occurred to me, well, what do you want it to sound like? And she said, well, they play a lot of this stuff down at my local, which was called the Good Mixer, this pub in Camden where she liked to shoot pool. And she played me the Shangri-Las. And I had some loose affiliation with that kind of pop music because, anyone who's seen like a Scorsese film, like someone's getting beat up and thrown in a trunk, they're playing a song like that.
Yeah.
But yeah. I thought it was just so cool. I thought she was so cool and smart. And I just thought, okay, I've never done anything like that, but I definitely would like to try with this person. So she went home back to her hotel that night, and I just stayed up all night, and I was just experimenting. I sat at the piano for a bit, and I came up with the keys to Back to Black, and then I just thought, okay, what does that music sound like? Okay, there's some tambourine with some spooky reverb, so I just did boom, tch, ba-boom, And she just came in the next day and she dug it and she said, yeah, this is what I want my album to sound like. And she stayed, and she had some other songs that she had written that she would just play me, write down a chord diagram, like, and have to really like map out the chords like tab, because I didn't know all these complicated jazz chords that she was playing. And then she would leave for the night and I would do the same thing, come up with a arrangement, drum beat, whatever felt good, and play it for the next morning. And usually, and that's how we did Wake Up Alone and You Know I'm No Good. And usually if she liked it the next day, she'd put a demo vocal and that would be the demo.
And she would write lyrics.
She had the lyrics. So Back to Black was the only one that she wrote the lyrics to the music, but everything else she had the music and the lyrics. So she would do that. And so we were both sort of just not making it up on the spot, because it wasn't like we were just like throwing crap at the wall. It was just like, it was so clear to me from what she wanted and what her songs were, what it needed. But of course that's completely subjective. Another producer would have heard it a completely different way. So, and that's what it's always been like. I mean, another time when I got together with Lady Gaga to work on the Joanne album, she came in, and I think she was coming off the Tony Bennett record. She Can Sing Anything, obviously. Yeah. And I think because of the Amy records I'd done and stuff, people maybe thought that I was really well versed in jazz and big band arrangements and stuff like that. And I think she had an idea that maybe that's the kind of record that we were going to do, maybe. And she came in and she had said, and I got the song Joanne, and she started to sing it like a bit like a Peggy Lee almost thing. Joanne, like, it's about my aunt. She explained the story, and I was like, well, I don't know, from the sentiment and everything that you're telling me, and just sitting here in this very beautiful Rick Rubin Shangri-La setting, like, I'm just hearing this Stevie Nicks guitar thing that's like much more Lindsey Buckingham, and that's kind of how we went. So you're just always looking for cues, like emotional, social, musical cues from the person right in front of you, or the universe, whatever it is. It's always no record has ever ended up where I thought it was going to be on day one. That's for sure.
What was it about Amy Winehouse? Because I've seen you describe that relationship as an instant connection.
Yeah.
Like, and you really, I mean, you worked together briefly, not briefly, but it wasn't.
It was right? Pretty brief. Yeah, absolutely.
But there was an intense connection quickly.
Yeah. There's just some people that you meet, and we've all had it, where you just meet someone later in your life, you're like, oh, I could have known you my whole life. Like, we're my best friend now. I think there was obviously some shared things, like a North London Jewish family background or whatever, and a huge, overwhelming passion for hip hop and soul music, being two white musicians. But that was it. Just instantly, I liked her so much. And that's probably part of the reason I stayed up all night that first night coming out with Back to Black, because I was just like, there's no way I want this person to leave and go back to England tomorrow. And that was the connection that we had.
That, obviously that, what happened with that record and its success and the Grammy Awards and the recognition that all of you got from that record really just kind of transformed your career, and you became famous as well after that record. How did you? I know that there was a sort of a weird period where Amy, she kind of accused you and other producers for taking credit for the record, and I think your response was like, "That's her. It's all her. That record is entirely her."
Yeah. I think it was just me she was taking a shot at. I think she was watching TV, and we hadn't spoken in a while, and I'm talking about Back to Black or something, I don't know, and she's just like, probably was just thinking like, man, fuck this guy taking all this credit. We made up 2 weeks later. But I wouldn't say it's guilt, but the wild success of Back to Black, which put me on the map, had a majority to do with Amy putting her pain just out there for the world. And yes, I found the really lovely probably arrangements that complemented it, and I was just so enamored with her and wanted to constantly impress her, you know.
Yeah.
That I'm sure I know I earned my check, but yes, of course, the fact that you know, these artists and many artists I've worked with, you know, they're the ones it's their deep dark shit that's sending the millions of people to want to listen to it and absorb it and feel absolved of their own pain. And the role of the producer is just to make sure it sounds as good as possible, like all the window dressing is there. So yeah, you know, that's not to say like, listen, producers, we don't all have our own demons and going through shit, but with something like Back to Black, of course, I always felt like, okay, I've done quite well of something that's about somebody else's pain.
It's interesting. I recently interviewed Carly Jepsen, and she talks about how her best work actually comes when she's happy, when things are going well. That
I've never heard anyone say that ever.
And it's
amazing
because I saw you in an interview say, for you, the best songs come through trying times, and when you work with artists who are kind of sort of working through emotions, that's when the best stuff comes out.
Yeah, I think that's also probably a cliche. I mean, I remember saying it. I'm not saying that I didn't. I think it's just, first of all, it's way, I mean, except for Call Me Maybe, like, it's way easier to write a banger that comes from a sad, melancholy emotion, really, than a happy place, because it's it's happy. It's impossible to make happy songs sound cool, really. I mean, except for maybe Happy, and Uptown Funk was a song that came from a very joyful jam. Like, the genesis of that was from a happy place. Even if it took 9 painstaking months to kind of haul it over the finish line. But yes, I do feel like melancholy, for me, when I sit down at the piano and I'm feeling down or melancholy, like I feel like I'm more likely to channel some nice chords. And that is hard. And, you know, I have been in a happy place in my life the past 2 years. So, it is like, you know, I mean, you definitely don't want to be miserable for the sake of writing good music, but you want to find a balance.
How do you tap into the well of emotions that the artist brings? Like, if you're, you know, they have something they want to say, and you are helping them to create a sound to match that.
Yeah.
How do you sort of think of yourself, I don't know, like embodying their kind of emotional journey? Like, how do you start to build that up?
I think that there's like this, if you think of, I don't know, this is a terrible visual representation, but like if each of us has 4 walls and we're a room, there is this element of tearing one of your walls down to just absorb and be empathetic and just feel the other person's energy while you're working on a record with them. Because, you know, I'm definitely not going to feel and live everything that Amy went through while she was making that record, but I need to feel some of that, because there's a certain amount of musical intelligence. She sings a song and I can hear, oh, I know what the right drum beat for that is. But one of the hardest songs to work on was Love Is a Losing Game, because it was heartbreaking and it was slow. And, you know, me as the guy who'd been DJing in nightclubs for 10 years up to that point, sometimes it is about not thinking, what's going to make people move? It's like, no, what's going to make people feel?
Yeah.
So with that song, it was a real struggle to find the right beat. And it wasn't until Gabe Roth from the Dap Kings, because he was a much more experienced, better arranger than me, certainly at that time, came up with the dunt, jat, dun, dun, gat, like almost a Dionne Warwick, Burt Bacharach feel, that let the band play but complemented the song. So yes, and I think a lot of my music early on in my career, I listen back to it and it's a little two-dimensional because I was so concerned with keeping the disco ball spinning and maybe not as much with the emotion of what the singer was doing.
And people who haven't seen this should go and watch it because your TED Talk is still, I think, one of my favorite TED Talks ever. And I saw it live and I've interviewed you about it, and it was just so good. It's such a great talk, and the basic message is there's nothing new under the sun, right? We're always recreating and reinventing out of sounds and influences, and that's the history of anything: products, books, art, right? Everything. But of course, it can also be challenging, right? Like, you listen to so much music. You're so influenced by the things you listen to, and even with Uptown Funk, there were like a bunch of different artists who claimed it was a derivative of their music or their music, and the Gap Band, of course, ended up receiving royalties from that. What's your take on that? Like, on the one hand, what you said in that TED Talk is true. All music is derived from previous music to some extent. But we also live in a world where that can mean that, your music is challenged. You're right.
I mean, it's gotten so crazy with the lawsuits now. I mean, I truly believe that if you take something, you borrow something from somebody else's song and it's intentional and you're aware of it, then you need to pay that person. But there are certain things in the case of the Uptown Funk lawsuit where we didn't, and I'm not just saying this to say it, like we absolutely didn't consciously borrow from this song, but the fact that it all comes from this sort of wellspring of blues, funk, and R&B, and the way the tide was going, we didn't want to have bad blood. Here's this song that everybody feels good about, like sort of like litigious nightmare, and the Gap Band, a band that we all love.
Right.
We're just like, okay, let's take the high road. But yes, it is absolutely crazy, and because there's now ambulance chasing lawyers for music, the equivalent of
Does
that.
it change how you think about music production and music composition now?
No, I still write the thing that just feels the most genuine on any day, and that could mean sitting down in front of a piano or turning on my MPC drum machine and chopping up a beat. Now, of course, if I do something good, I'm like racking my brain. Oh crap, like what is this playing? Does this sound like anything? You're just like want to be so sure now these days. You hear stories about these big, pop producers that basically live with a musicologist in the session to keep going. Does this sound like anything? Is this, usually you finish the song and then you send it off to the musicologist, but now it's gone a step beyond. But there's nothing I can really control about that. I could make something that I think is the most original thing ever and get sued for it. So I have to write the things that I think that move me and then deal with it later.
Mark, I'm curious about something that I read you say in an interview, and basically, I guess during the pandemic, and maybe even before that, you started to wonder whether you had a role as a producer, that whether you were relevant, whether you could, I don't know, sort of add value to. I mean, I guess it was in the context of working with Diplo or with Kevin from Tame Impala or others. I mean, this is after like you've won 7 Grammys and you just produced Electricity with Diplo with Dua Lipa, and you did Nothing Breaks Like a Heart with Miley Cyrus, which is one of the most beautiful songs she's ever made. I mean, it's it's like Dolly Parton, all of a sudden all over again. And I wonder where that crisis of confidence came from.
I mean, I'm sure that's just basic insecurity and anxiety of just going like, how many days do I have left? Months.
Yeah.
But there is something obviously about pop music feeling like a young person's format maybe. And, of course, Quincy did Thriller when he was maybe in his late 40s. But in general, it feels like the excitement of new sounds and new music and things like that. How do I want to say this? It just feels like you don't want to be the last guy at the party who looks like they're holding on too long either. Like, I love, there's, all these young producers now, like 20, 22, 23, the way that they make music and flip beats in Ableton in 3 seconds and play a little guitar line and turn it into 3 things. Like, that's very exciting to me. And I started to think, well, I don't exactly know why, but I think that I was just starting to think, okay, cool. Well, if this is my time, let me exit gracefully and not be making whack records that make me sound like an old guy who's lost touch. I think that's kind of what it was about. There's certain people who are older, Rick Rubin, because he has such a great way with artists and getting to them. He has a skill set that's timeless in a way. Max Martin has just written some of the greatest pop songs ever, and his gift is melody, and melody is timeless. So I was wondering, probably, are my tools timeless? Are they not? Like, am I just hanging out a bit too long, like the guy at the party? So that was it. And I don't know. I think that really, the success of Barbie and what's happened with that stuff is, I basically, when I left LA, I thought, okay, I'm leaving the epicenter of music and the pop music industry, because that's what LA is. And New York is always such a cultural generator of art, but is a ghost town pretty much for music and sessions and songwriting. And only the massively successful artists like Travis Scott and Kendrick Lamar can afford to come to New York, like the way that artists used to go to like the Bahamas or Montserrat to make a record.
Right.
And come to these amazing places like Electric Lady, which is, one of the greatest studios in the world. But so I just I moved to New York, and I was like, all right, I'm not exactly kissing the game goodbye, but I'm going to be here and I'll find something new to work on. And I was working on this book, and then I ended up working on some music for the Barbie film, and then like somehow that has now become this pop juggernaut as well, in a way that I'm just like, okay, so I still have something to offer.
Do you think, I'm curious, are you the kind of person, because I definitely am, and I think might be genetically encoded, honestly, where it doesn't matter how long I've done what I've done or how much success I have in what I do, I'm always thinking like, this can just go away all tomorrow. And do you kind of think that way?
Not only can it all go away tomorrow, but I actually don't deserve the thing that I,
Right.
Yeah, I can't help it. And I, now it's just hesitant to even utter the words imposter syndrome, because it's just become such like a blanket term. I sort of hate it. But when my therapist first mentioned it to me 6 years ago, it made a lot of sense. I think, yes, of course, those things. And I think I used to clutch onto that and ride it like a rocket out the atmosphere, because I loved it, because it made me a workaholic and work so hard and act like I never had any success. Like, it's so, I valued it because it was a great driver. And then now I'm obviously in a point in my life where I don't want to be in the studio 20 hours a day and being an insane workaholic. So just finding the balance. But I do, I've learned to just, when somebody says something that's a compliment, I just like sit on my hands and I take it, instead of sort of backpedaling my way out of any credit for whatever they're talking about.
When you were asked to produce the Barbie soundtrack, how did you work with Greta Gerwig on what that would sound, and how it would match the look of that film and the feel of that film? Like, can you kind of walk me through the process?
Well, we first spoke before she had started filming, And my friend George Draculius, who's a great record producer, now a big music supervisor, connected us. And he said, hey, I want to talk to you about this new Greta Gerwig film. I had no idea what it was or what it was about. And so we talked, and I was such a huge fan of Lady Bird. And obviously she's just so cool. And I knew she was writing it with Noah Baumbach, her partner, who I love his films. So we just talked, and she said, well, we need 2 songs, really. There's a big dance number that's going to happen early on in the film that sort of caps off Barbie's perfect day in Barbie Land. And then we want a Ken song. And we have no idea what the Ken song looks like. We just know we need a Barbie song and a Ken song. Yeah. So I read the script, and I just loved it. I was like, whether or not I get this gig, this is going to be my favorite movie next year for sure. And I felt it reminded me of when I first met Amy, and I wanted to stay up all night making the best piece of music to make sure I got the gig. So they said, listen, we're starting dance rehearsals actually for the dance number next week. So we need a track. And I was like, Jesus, like, I want to make something that's so great that I get this gig. And we're locked into now a tempo and a feel for this. And they started jokingly calling Barbie and Ken hit songs, which then went to Barbie and Ken summer smashes, like we're just like, it was a little tongue in cheek, but there was some, whatever, the pressure was on. And I tried a couple things, and I came up with this basic skeleton of what became Dance the Night, the Dua Lipa song, and I sent it overnight. And Greta wrote me back like the next morning, like, I love it, this is great, da-da-da. They started the dance rehearsals. And then for the Ken song, I didn't know. I had all these ideas of who I might write it with and who was maybe going to sing it. Because there was literally nothing in the script that said Ken's going to sing a song or Ryan Gosling's going to sing. So I just, the Ken character had really sunk its hooks into me from the film, because he is, he does have it kind of tough. And probably the fact that I knew that it was Ryan Gosling, when you're picturing Ryan Gosling, like this great actor playing it with both comedy and pathos, these lines, I think even more, I was just, this Ken character had its hooks in me. And I just had this idea for this line. I think I was walking in the studio, I'm just Ken, anywhere else I'd be a 10. And I just thought, oh, that sounds like, that feels like the start of a chorus. So I went down, and I don't usually sing, and I certainly don't sing on my own demos, but I just sent in this sort of mumbly demo to Noah and Greta, and they really loved it. And then Andrew Wyatt, my songwriting partner, came over, and we finished the song together. And Greta was just like, Ryan actually says he really digs this song, and he wants to sing it in the film. And so it was crazy. They started to send me storyboards of, this is how we've reworked this big battle scene to get your song in. And here you are, you've signed up because you love these filmmakers, and all of a sudden they're like, you sent them something that they dig so much that they're sort of changing the film. It was super exciting. And so I went to England, and I recorded the vocals with Ryan. And then Greta added the big dance scene where all the Kens have this dance off. She added that much later. So she's like, okay, I need one more, like basically to go up to 11, right? So we added that Kenergy part. And so it was just, and then from that, basically Greta, I think she got that I really understood her musical language and what she wanted for the film. And then as Atlantic got involved to do the soundtrack, I just became an executive producer with Atlantic to just see this through. So I had a good sense of what she liked before even seeing a single scene of the film, but just from these long conversations and reading the script. And Noah was very involved with the music, because he's an encyclopedia of music. And then we would just have a scene, and we'd think, okay, well, we'd play 30 minutes of the film for Charlie XCX or Billie Eilish and Phineas in this rough, just scenes across the movie in this rough, uncut form. And then everyone would go away super inspired and come back, and usually we'd tell them right where we wanted their film to, right where they wanted the song to be. And the Lizzo one was really an example of Lizzo writing so tailored to the picture that it's almost like, what came first, the song or the movie? Like, it feels like a musical number. So it was it was just it was a lot of work. I'm not going to say it wasn't work, but it was a shitload of fun too, because it just...
Is it almost like being the editor of a magazine where you send your writers out, they come back with the story, and then, in this case, the song, right? And then you're hearing it and you're like, yeah, that's great. Let's just change this or refine this or adjust this part.
On some of the songs, absolutely, because I didn't write all of them, but I think a lot of them, it was definitely more than being an editor. You know, it was a piece of music that Andrew and I wrote that might get turned into a song.
Yeah.
But with the songs that we just, like Charlie XCX Speed Drive, yes, that's just a thing where you're just sort of the editor, you know. Billy and Phineas wrote this, you know, gobsmackingly gorgeous, haunting ballad, and then Phineas was like, hey, do you hear anything on this? Like, if you want to try an orchestral arrangement. Then Andrew and I, you know, did the orchestral arrangement with the Nicki Minaj Ice Spice song.
Yeah.
You know, it played a little bit of synths. I was sort of just like, whatever it needs. I don't need any credit. I don't really care. I'm here to just all these brilliantly talented people. If there's some little, you know, old man tricks that I know, that I'm happy to bring in. And then, you know, then obviously with Dance the Night and the Sam Smith song and Ken, then that's different, because, you know, those were songs that we really wrote.
You say old man tricks, I know, sort of half jokingly, but I wonder where, I mean, obviously you are, every time you go and work with an artist or work on music, you're starting again with a blank slate. And
yes.
So, you know, and the music that you make and the way you think about music is I have to assume very different from how you thought of it when you were 20 or even 30, you know, even after Back to Black. And so where does like the sort of the creative energy come from? How do you keep it sort of, you know, at the risk of sounding like a cliche, but how do you sort of keep that fire lit?
I think that I remember really specifically when Ice Spice and Riot, her producer, were in my studio, and they were playing me the demo of the Barbie Girl track. And, you know, Riot is 21 years old, and his tracks are like the sound of New York drill, hip hop. Like, and he was kind of asking, like, what do you hear on it? And I was like, I don't know. Like, don't let me touch it. Like, I might hear something and it's completely the wrong frequency or whatever it is for what this wonderful thing is supposed to be. I was like, I'll play a little keys because I think you could use a bit of melody, but that was it. So I feel like it's knowing when there's some really exciting thing to just stay the hell back, and there's other things when there's like arrangement skills and whatever, where I think that I can, you know, lend a hand or an ear. And I just am constantly excited and inspired. It sounds cliche, but and if I hear something that gets me excited, it could be somebody's voice, it could be a producer's snare drum. I can't help but have ideas. They might not be the right ones all the time, but it's just I get inspired very easily.
Mark, where do you sort of see I mean, you know, we talked about Quincy Jones or Brian Eno, or can even mention Burt Bacharach, right? I mean, he obviously was a songwriter in addition to, he did a bunch of things too, but where do you kind of see yourself? And it's kind of, I know it's sort of hard to answer that question without sounding like totally self-ingratiating, so maybe I'll rescue you from it, because I think that I would put you in the category of all those people. But do you sort of kind of see yourself for the rest of your career continuing to work with artists, continuing to produce music, release your own music? Or do you ever sometimes think about, you know, trying something totally, I know you started you're working a book and you started a podcast, I think, too?
Right. Yes, that's no longer on, but yes, that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
The podcast, it was starting to do like 2 days of research or a day of research and then 4 hours. Yes, I'd leave it to the pros.
And then you did this documentary series with Apple TV. I mean, I don't know, how do you think about the next like sort of phase of your career?
I mean, when we were working on Barbie, and then we ended up doing the score, Andrew White and I did the score for the film, and that was just so exciting because I'm just such a huge fan of film scores, and not just the obvious, John Williams, Barry, Elfman, but like Dave Grusin's score for Goonies and the Tootsie. Like obviously I'm a kid of the 80s. I was born in 75, but like I dropped into pop culture in that era. So we were so excited about the opportunity to do this, and even though we had never done a whole film before, and in the middle of making this score, because we realized Greta really loved both the synthetic feel of the synths and stuff that felt very Barbie land, but as well she's just loves the rich orchestration, the elegance of the orchestra and the symphony. So we've finding this balance, and in the middle of it we got this synthesizer, the Yamaha CS80, which is like this storied synthesizer from the late 70s that Vangelis famously used, and Jean-Michel Jarre, and it's they only made 80 of them. That's why it's called the CS80, and it's, in the 80s everyone threw them out for their new digital Yamaha DX7s, and there's very few of them left. But I just couldn't wait to come to the studio every morning to mess around with the front panel, which just looks like some kind of like Star Trek cockpit, but with 70,000 more levers on it, to find these sounds. I still think in that way, like there's a new piece of gear, and I just can't wait to like come for 2 hours this morning and mess with it until, by playing with these different oscillators, I'm going to hit a note or play a chord that's going to be so inspiring to me that I'm going to have no choice but to write a song.
Hey, it's Guy, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation. For more like it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And for the audio version, just open up your favorite podcast app, search for The Great Creators, and tap follow.